The screech of tires was an acoustic scar on the afternoon calm, a tearing sound that ripped through the placid hum of cicadas and distant lawnmowers. My head snapped up, a primal instinct overriding the peaceful moment. My son Leo, all of 10 years old, and a lanky collection of elbows and knees, was stumbling backward on the sidewalk. His bright red t-shirt, a beacon of childhood innocence, was twisted in a woman's iron grip. Her face a mask of contorted rage that seemed grotesquely disproportionate to the suburban setting, was inches from his. "You don't belong here," she spat, her voice a shrill stiletto of sound. "This is a private neighborhood. We don't want your kind wandering around." Leo's eyes wide and mirroring the vast, indifferent summer sky darted towards me. His sketchbook, where he'd been meticulously rendering the intricate bark patterns of the ancient oak on our lawn, lay forgotten at his feet, its pages fluttering in the gentle breeze. My blood didn't just run cold, it froze in my veins. This wasn't a simple neighborly spat over a misplaced ball. This was a venomous current, old and dark, bubbling to the surface. "Let go of my son," I said. My voice was dangerously low, a controlled rumble that barely contained the seismic fury threatening to erupt. Years in law enforcement had taught me to cage the beast of my anger, to use it as fuel for cold, calculated action. I started towards them, each step a leaden weight on the pavement, the idyllic scene of manicured lawns and blooming rose bushes blurring into a hostile landscape. The woman, either oblivious to my approach or emboldened by her own righteous fury, tightened her grip. The fabric of Leo's shirt stretched taut against his small, heaving chest. He was trespassing, she declared, her gaze finally flicking to me, a volatile cocktail of defiance and smugness. "These sidewalks are for residents only." "This is a public sidewalk, ma'am," I corrected her, my eyes locked on the white-knuckled hand clutching my child. The knot of dread in my stomach coiled tighter. I knew this type. I'd seen it in interrogation rooms and during tense standoffs. It was an entitlement so profound, it became a form of blindness, a quick leap to judgment, fueled by a prejudice that simmered just beneath the surface of polite society. "Don't you dare tell me what's what," she snapped, her eyes narrowing into venomous slits. "I know who belongs here, and who doesn't." Her gaze swept dismissively over Leo, lingering for a sickening fraction of a second, on his brown skin, on his dark, curly hair. The air crackled thick with the unspoken but deafeningly loud accusation. That was the moment the switch flipped. The years of training, the countless soul-wearying incidents of injustice. I had witnessed the raw, cellular protectiveness a father feels for his child. It all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard resolve. "Ma'am," I said, and this time, my voice carried the unmistakable, unwavering weight of my office. "I am Sheriff Thompson, and you are going to release my son. Right. Now." The effect was instantaneous, but not entirely what I had anticipated. Her grip on Leo loosened, a flicker of surprise or perhaps sheer annoyance crossing her features. But the rage didn't dissipate. It calcified, hardening into a stubborn, petulant disbelief. "Sheriff," she scoffed, a harsh, grating laugh escaping her lips. "You can't be serious. You live here." This boy was casing the neighborhood, causing trouble. Trouble? Leo's voice was a small, trembling whisper. "I was just drawing the tree." He pointed a shaky finger at his abandoned notebook, a testament to his innocence. I reached them in 2 more strides, placing a firm, reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder. He flinched, a small, involuntary movement that felt like a physical blow to my heart. The raw fear in his eyes was a mirror, reflecting my own worst nightmares. "He was on a public sidewalk sketching a tree, ma'am. That is not trespassing, and it is certainly not causing trouble." "But he doesn't live around here," she stammered, her earlier certainty finally beginning to fracture, replaced by a whining indignation. "I've never seen him before. Or you." "That is completely irrelevant," I stated, my voice like chilled steel. "What is relevant is that you have just physically assaulted a minor. You laid your hands on him without cause. In this state, that constitutes assault. Her eyes widened, a hint of genuine panic, finally dawning behind the mask of outrage. I didn't. I just. I wanted him to leave. You grabbed him by the shirt. I countered, my gaze unwavering. You physically restrained a child against his will. That is the definition of assault. Furthermore, given your statements about who belongs here, and the fact that you targeted a 10-year-old boy based on the color of his skin, I believe we also have a clear case for racial intimidation. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of fear. The bravado that had fueled her aggression evaporated like mist in the sun. This is ridiculous," she mumbled, but the conviction had been hollowed out. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "What's ridiculous is you accosting a child and putting your hands on him. What's reprehensible is assuming he's a criminal because of his race." Other neighbors, drawn by the commotion, were starting to emerge. Faces appeared in windows, figures on porches, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. The woman whose name I would soon learn was Karen Miller suddenly seemed to shrink, her imposing rage diminishing under their collective silent gaze. I didn't mean anything by it," she stammered, her eyes darting around, nervously seeking an ally, and finding none. "Intent doesn't negate the action, Mrs. Miller," I replied, my voice calm but unyielding. "You assaulted a child. You made discriminatory statements. These are serious offenses." I knelt beside Leo, my hand still a steadying presence on his shoulder. "Are you all right, son?" He nodded, but his lower lip trembled. "She scared me, Dad. She was so angry." The simple, unvarnished truth in his voice cut through me, sharper than any blade. The protective instinct surged again, a white-hot fire mixed with a profound sadness at the world's ugliness. No child of mine, no child in this county should ever feel that fear, that otherness, simply for existing in their own skin. I stood up, facing Karen Miller, who was now wringing her hands, her eyes pleading for an escape she had not offered my son. "Ma'am," I said, my voice resonating with the full authority of my office, "you are under arrest for assault and racial intimidation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words of the Miranda warning hung in the charged air, stark and immutable. A few neighbors gasped. Karen Miller's face crumpled, the tough facade collapsing into the pathetic, tear-streaked visage of someone whose world, built on a foundation of unearned superiority, was crumbling around her. Life in Harmony Creek had been, until that moment, precisely what its name suggested. We had moved here 5 years ago from the city, drawn by the promise of excellent schools, sprawling parks, and a safe, nurturing environment for Leo. My wife Sarah, a kindergarten teacher with a heart as warm and open as a summer day, had woven herself into the community's fabric with ease. She was on the PTA, ran a book club, and knew the names of every dog on our street. Leo thrived, his passion for art blooming in the quiet green spaces of our new home. We had built a life here, a good life, a life we believed was insulated from the sharper edges of the world. The incident with Karen Miller was a brutal awakening. It was a reminder that the insidious poison of bigotry doesn't confine itself to cities or specific regions. It can fester anywhere, even behind the pristine facades of suburban bliss. It ignited a fierce determination within me, not just as a law enforcement officer, but as a father. This wasn't just about one woman's hate. It was about defending the very idea of the home we had sought to create. Karen was a relative newcomer, a transplant from a wealthier, more homogeneous enclave upstate. She kept to herself, her interactions with neighbors limited to curt nods or sharp complaints about fallen leaves or a child's ball rolling onto her immaculate lawn. We knew of her, but we didn't know her. We certainly never suspected the venom she harbored. The confrontation was the spark that lit a fuse we didn't even know existed, pulling us into a drama that would not only challenge our family, but test the very soul of Harmony Creek. The arrest was a bombshell. The local news website ran with the headline, "Sheriff Arrests Neighbor for Assault on His Own Son." The story exploded online, a digital firestorm of comments that quickly devolved into a polarized war of words. Our phone rang incessantly. Friends and neighbors called with messages of support, their voices laced with shock and outrage. But there were other calls too. Anonymous numbers with voices that spat vile epithets echoing Karen's sentiments, accusing me of abusing my power of playing the race card. The rising action began with the dawn of the next day. A small but vocal group of protesters appeared on the public green across from our house. Some held signs supporting us, "Hate has no home here." But others, organized with unnerving speed, held signs for Karen support property rights, stop the abuse of power, all lives matter. The tension in the neighborhood became a palpable, suffocating thing. A simple walk to the car felt like running a gauntlet of judging eyes. Then, the campaign to discredit me began in earnest. Anonymous emails crafted with vicious precision started circulating. They dredged up a contentious arrest from 5 years prior, twisting the facts to paint me as a hot-headed, trigger-happy cop. Whispers slithered through the town's social circles, insinuating that I had a personal vendetta, that this was a power play. Sarah, usually a pillar of calm strength, became withdrawn and anxious. She faced a chillingly subtle ostracism at school. A few parents pulled their children from her class, citing vague concerns. She'd come home, her face etched with a weary pain, and we'd hold each other in the quiet of our kitchen, the silence thick with unspoken fears. "Maybe we should just drop the charges, Mike," she whispered one night, her voice thin. "It's not worth this. Look at what it's doing to Leo. If we drop the charges, we're telling them they won." I said, my own voice, rough with frustration. "We're telling them that if you threaten and intimidate, you get your way. What does that teach our son?" Our conversation was a tightrope walk between protecting our peace and fighting for a principle. The second shocking incident came a week later, and it was a chilling escalation. It wasn't just vandalism. Tucked under our windshield wiper one morning was a plain, white envelope. Inside a single sheet of paper with words cut from magazines like a caricature of a ransom note, "Your boy should have stayed off our sidewalk. Some places aren't for everyone. Next time will be worse." A cold, primal fear, different from the anger I'd felt before, seized me. This wasn't just the act of one unhinged woman anymore. The careful, anonymous nature of the note, the coordination of the protests, the targeted smear campaign, it all pointed to something more organized. Karen Miller hadn't just tapped into a latent prejudice. She had activated a network. The pressure intensified. Citing the anonymous complaints and the growing public support for Karen, the County Board of Supervisors announced a formal internal affairs investigation into my handling of the arrest. I understood the procedure, the need for transparency. But the timing felt punitive, a deliberate move to undermine my authority and lend credence to the narrative that I was the one in the wrong. Amid the escalating turmoil, glimmers of hope fought to break through the darkness. Many neighbors, horrified by the threats, rallied around us with renewed vigor. They organized their own counter-presence on the green, their signs for love and inclusion outnumbering the hateful ones. Our friend Mark, a burly contractor, started parking his truck in front of our house at night, a silent, imposing sentinel. Sarah's closest friends at school formed a protective circle around her, fiercely shutting down gossip and offering unwavering support. This wasn't just our fight anymore. The battle lines were being drawn throughout Harmony Creek. The rising action was a brutal, relentless assault on our sense of security. But in forcing the darkness into the light, it also revealed the town's true character, not as a monolith of harmony, but as a complex tapestry of both deep-seated intolerance and profound decency. The midpoint twist arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, chilling slide of a document across a polished table. It happened during my deposition for the Internal Affairs investigation. Karen Miller's lawyer, a man named Arthur Caldwell, was the embodiment of expensive predatory litigation. His suit was impeccable, his smile was a bloodless slash, and his voice was a smooth, cultured weapon. "Sheriff." He began, his tone dripping with faux sympathy. My client was clearly overwrought. "But I believe you'll find she was not, in fact, mistaken about the core issue." He produced a document, a certified copy of the original property deed for Karen Miller's lot, along with the founding charter for the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association, dated 1958. "If you'll turn to page 4 of the charter, section C, paragraph 2, he purred. I read the text, and the air left my lungs. The clause was archaic, written in dense legalese, but its meaning was unambiguous. The strip of land containing the sidewalk in front of several original homes, including Miller's, was designated as private property maintained by the homeowner, not as a public easement. But that wasn't the real bomb. The next paragraph contained the true poison. It was a restrictive covenant, a relic of a darker time, stating that property in the original development tract could not be sold to, leased to, or occupied by any person not of the Caucasian race. While legally unenforceable since the Fair Housing Act of 1968, its presence in the document was a chilling artifact. Caldwell let the silence hang in the air before continuing. While the racial covenant is, of course, an unfortunate and obsolete relic of a bygone era, the clause regarding the sidewalk's private ownership has never been legally challenged or amended. My client, a diligent homeowner, was well within her rights to ask an individual to leave her private property. My world tilted. This wasn't just a forgotten detail on a dusty deed. This was a premeditated defense. "Are you suggesting," the lead investigator asked, his brow furrowed, "that your client's actions were motivated by this property clause?" "Absolutely," Caldwell said smoothly. "Mrs. Miller is a member of the Harmony Creek Heritage Committee, a small group of residents dedicated to preserving the original character and bylaws of our town. They have been researching these old documents for months. She wasn't acting out of racial animus, Sheriff. She was enforcing a documented property, a right she felt was being ignored. Perhaps her methods were indelicate, but her premise was sound. The Heritage Committee. It clicked into place. The coordinated protests, the targeted emails, the threatening note. It wasn't just Karen. It was a group that had been digging through old hateful documents, looking for weapons. They had found one and put it in Karen Miller's hand. Caldwell leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "In fact, Sheriff, given that you arrested a private citizen for defending her own property, and that you did so in a highly emotional state, given your personal connection to the alleged trespasser, we are exploring our options. A civil suit for malicious prosecution and abuse of power is not off the table. A man of the law like yourself must surely understand the difference between justice and a personal vendetta. One can end a career." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a guillotine held over my neck. The twist wasn't just that the sidewalk might be private. It was that my family had stumbled into a carefully laid trap, set by an organized group of bigots who were weaponizing the town's ugly past to justify their hate in the present. They weren't just defending Karen. They were trying to make an example of us. The fight for justice had just become a fight for my career, my reputation, and my family's future in the town we called home. The revelation of the Heritage Committee and their legal maneuvering sent shockwaves through the community. The upcoming community meeting, once intended as a simple show of solidarity, transformed into a high-stakes arena. The town hall was packed to the rafters, the air thick with a volatile mixture of anger, confusion, and suspicion. You could feel the town fracturing in real time. Mayor Thompson, a distant cousin, a fact that added another layer of awkwardness, a fundamentally decent but conflict-averse man, stood at the podium, looking deeply uneasy. He pleaded for civility, but his words were swallowed by the tense murmuring of the crowd. Several neighbors spoke first, their voices passionate, as they defended us and condemned the hatred that had surfaced. But their arguments now felt emotionally driven, lacking the hard edge of legal standing. Then Arthur Caldwell took the floor. He was masterful. With practiced ease, he laid out the case, presenting enlarged copies of the deed and the 1958 charter. He never raised his voice. He was the picture of reason. This is not about race. He insisted, his gaze sweeping the room. This is about the fundamental right of a homeowner to feel secure on her own property. The Heritage Committee, far from being a sinister cabal, is simply a group of concerned citizens who believe that rules matter. Mrs. Miller was attempting to uphold a rule. Was she clumsy? Yes. Did she speak in a moment of panic? Absolutely. And for any distress caused to young Leo, we are profoundly sorry. The apology was a masterpiece of insincerity, acknowledging harm without admitting any fault. He then pivoted, aiming his words directly at me, where I sat in the front row. The real question for this community is whether we want a sheriff who lets his personal feelings cloud his professional judgment. Is it justice to arrest a woman for protecting her home simply because the person she confronted happens to be the sheriff's son? When I was finally called to speak, the walk to the podium felt a mile long. I looked out at the faces, friends offering silent encouragement, the stony, accusatory glares of Karen's supporters, and the uncertain, troubled expressions of those caught in the middle. I acknowledged the deed. Yes, I said, my voice steady. It appears a hateful, discriminatory charter from 1958 says that Sidewalk is private property. But we, as a community, have a choice. We can be governed by the dead hand of a prejudiced past, or we can be guided by the living principles of decency and respect. I looked toward Karen Miller and Caldwell. Grabbing a 10-year-old child and screaming in his face is not a clumsy way to address a perceived trespass. It is an act of aggression. And telling a brown child he doesn't belong here while standing on soil governed by a racist covenant is not a misunderstanding. It is prejudice, plain and simple. It is breathing life back into this town's worst angels. A smattering of applause was quickly drowned out by hostile shouts. Caldwell was on his feet, objecting, but the mayor, finding a sliver of backbone, waved him down. The climax of the evening came from an unexpected source. An elderly woman, Mrs. Eleanor Davison, who had lived in Harmony Creek her entire life, slowly rose to her feet. A hush fell over the room. Her voice, though frail with age, carried the undeniable weight of moral authority. Arthur Caldwell, your father would be ashamed of you. She began, her sharp eyes fixed on the lawyer, who flinched as if struck. I knew your father. He helped draft the town's new charter in the 70s, the one that explicitly renounced these ugly old rules. We all made a choice then. We chose to be better. She turned to the crowd. That sidewalk has been our shared space for 50 years. I watched my children learn to ride their bikes on that very spot. We've held bake sales there. Children have drawn hopscotch squares and pictures of rocket ships right where little Leo was sitting. This has never been about a strip of concrete. The Miller family knew it. The Heritage Committee knows it. They were looking for an excuse. They were looking for a fight. And they chose to have it with a 10-year-old boy. Her words landed like hammer blows, shattering Caldwell's carefully constructed facade. She wasn't arguing law. She was testifying to the town's soul. She exposed the legal argument as a hollow pretext for a deeper, uglier motive. The meeting ended without a formal resolution, but the tide had irrevocably shifted. Mrs. Davison had reminded the community of who they had chosen to be. The fight was far from over, but now it wasn't just my family against a shadowy committee. It was the heart of Harmony Creek, fighting against the poison in its own veins. The days leading up to Karen Miller's trial were a blur of nervous energy and relentless preparation. The internal affairs investigation concluded clearing me of misconduct, but issuing a formal reprimand for not immediately recusing myself, a slap on the wrist that felt like both a victory and a concession to Caldwell's pressure campaign. The charges of assault and racial intimidation against Karen stood, but her defense was now formidable. The trial became a media spectacle. The small county courtroom was packed, a microcosm of the town's deep divisions. Caldwell's defense was brilliant in its malevolence. He portrayed Karen Miller as the victim, a frightened woman, a staunch defender of community principles, hounded by a powerful man with a badge and a grudge. When Leo took the stand, the room was silent. In his small, clear voice, he recounted the events. He didn't just sound scared. He sounded confused. "I didn't understand why she was so mad," he said, looking at the jury. "I was just drawing. I like the way the bark on that tree looks like a map." His simple, artistic observation was a more powerful indictment of Karen's paranoid rage than anything I could have said. The turning point, however, came from the prosecution's final witnesses. First was my own testimony. On the stand under Caldwell's withering cross-examination, I held my ground. "So Sheriff Caldwell sneered. You see a woman talking to your son, and your first instinct, your law enforcement instinct, is to arrest her." "No, Mr. Caldwell," I replied. My gaze locked on the jury. My first instinct was that of a father watching a stranger physically grab his child while yelling at him. My law enforcement training kicked in to ensure I handled the subsequent arrest by the book. But let's be clear, any citizen witnessing that event would have been justified in calling the police. It doesn't matter who the child's father is. What matters is what happened to the child. Then the prosecution called their surprise witness, unearthed by my own frantic late-night digging. Not Mrs. Davison, but a man named Mr. Abernathy, a retired county clerk who had worked in the records office for 40 years. He testified that he knew the members of the Heritage Committee. He testified that 3 months prior to the incident, they had spent days in the archives specifically requesting and copying pre-1960s property charters and zoning laws. They weren't just researching. Mr. Abernathy said, his voice dry and precise. They were asking questions, legal questions, about the enforceability of old covenants, about the legal definition of private versus public walkways. It was clear they were looking for ammunition. This testimony proved premeditation. It showed this wasn't a spontaneous overreaction. It was the execution of a planned strategy. Finally, Mrs. Davison took the stand. She didn't speak of law. She spoke of life. She told the story of Harmony Creek, of its shared history, of its collective decision to leave its prejudiced past behind. "That sidewalk belongs to our children," she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. "It belongs to our future, not to a hateful piece of paper from our past." The jury was out for 6 agonizing hours. Sarah and I sat holding hands, Leo sandwiched between us, his head resting on my shoulder. The silence in the courtroom was a physical weight. When the jury filed back in, their faces were grim and unreadable. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman, stood and unfolded a piece of paper. On the charge of assault, she read, her voice clear and unwavering. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Miller, guilty." A sharp collective intake of breath. "On the charge of racial intimidation, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty." Sarah's sob of relief was the only sound in the stunned courtroom. I pulled Leo into a tight hug, burying my face in his hair. The verdict a wave of catharsis, washing over months of fear and anger. The falling action was not a gentle slope, but a series of aftershocks. Karen Miller was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory enrollment in both anger management and racial sensitivity training. The sentence was a public repudiation of her actions, and by extension, the ideology of the Heritage Committee. The social consequences for Karen and her cohort were swift. The committee disbanded, its members retreating into sullen silence. Karen became a pariah. Neighbors she had once counted as allies now crossed the street to avoid her. She put her house on the market within a month. Spurred by the public outcry and the testimony of Mrs. Davison and Mr. Abernathy, the County Board of Supervisors took a historic step. They reviewed all the old neighborhood charters, officially nullifying the obsolete property clauses and formally designating all sidewalks as public rights-of-way. It was a bureaucratic move, but it was a powerful symbol. The town was legally closing the door on its segregated history. Yet the resolution wasn't a simple fairy tale ending. The healing was a messy, ongoing process. We organized a Harmony Creek Unity Block Party on the public green. It was a beautiful day, full of laughter and shared food. But I saw the remnants of the division. A few families stayed away. I watched as one of Karen's known supporters had a quiet but tense exchange with Mark, our contractor friend, before turning and leaving the party. Unity. I realized wasn't a destination you arrived at. It was a thing you had to build and defend day after day. The most profound change was within our own home. The incident had left its mark. One evening, a few weeks after the trial, I found Leo sitting on the porch steps, his sketchbook open on his lap. He wasn't drawing the tree. He was sketching the faces of the people in the courtroom. Caldwell's smug sneer, the jury's focused intensity, Mrs. Davison's kind, wrinkled face. His art had become a way of processing the world in all its complexity and ugliness. "Dad," he said, not looking up from his drawing, "will people always be like her?" I sat down beside him, the evening air cool on my skin. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him no, that the world was good and people were kind. But he had seen too much for easy platitudes. "Some people might be Leo," I said softly. "The world has some darkness in it. We saw it up close." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "But look at all the people who stood with us. Look at Mrs. Davison. Look at Mark. Look at your mom's friends. The darkness is there, but the light is stronger. What we learned is that you can't let the darkness win. You have to stand up even when you're scared." He finally looked at me, his young eyes holding an old wisdom. "I'm still a little scared, but I'm not as scared as I was." He tapped his pencil on a blank page in his sketchbook. "I think I'm going to draw our house next, with everyone on the lawn, all the good people." Our life in Harmony Creek was no longer the idyllic, peaceful existence we had once known. The illusion of perfect safety had been shattered. But in its place was something more resilient, more real. We had faced the town's hidden demons, and in doing so, had helped it find its better angels. The scars would remain a reminder of the fight. But they were also a testament to our strength, a map of where we had been, and a promise that together we would continue to build a community where every child of every color could sit on any sidewalk and sketch a tree in peace.